Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, a company called D2L recently set off my tech spidey senses when I read that they're transforming the way that the world learns, all by helping learners of all ages achieve more than they ever dreamed possible by simply making technology more human. So Stewart Watts from D2L will be joining me on the podcast today. We're going to talk about all that, along with the current state of digital learning programs and how institutions are approaching digital experience, and also what institutions could be prioritising as a part of their recovery plans, and how learning is increasingly becoming data-driven and why that is a good thing. So we'll be talking about that and much more, so buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to the UK, where Stuart is waiting to share his story with us today. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Stuart. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
I certainly can. Thank you for having me, Neil. So who am I? I'm a married man. I'm married to a wonderful woman who's also a very successful technology salesperson and also a part-time children's author. We are parents to a beautiful little girl who's shortly going to turn 2. So as you can imagine, we're in a little bit of a difficult phase, but we love her dearly. I would say I'm an avid golfer, so I get out on the golf course as much as I can, and a bit of an edtech enthusiast as well. So that's a little bit about me.
You said an edtech enthusiast there. I'm curious. Before we learn more about your success, I want to learn more about how you got where you are today. So Can you share your origin story, where your passion for tech came from, what lit that spark, and tell the listeners a little bit more about maybe the moment that put you on the path that you're on right now?
Yeah, I can certainly try, although I hope I don't let your listeners down. I don't think there was a particularly seminal moment or a light bulb moment. But if I think back to why I ended up where I am, I think I went into sales because my dad was in sales. So I still remember the days of being picked up from school and by my dad and listening to him and the relationships he built with his customers as we drove home. And I fancied a bit of that. And my mother was a teacher, so I always had a keen interest in education from an early age as well. I started my career at a much larger company to the one that I work at in a sort of sales graduate scheme and worked my way through that way. I then moved into a sort of a medium-sized company in the third sector, so working with charities. But that's also where I started to work in education. So we worked with development offices within universities, and I got a bit of first-hand experience about how technology could have the power to transform education. And I got quite passionate about it at that point. And having worked for a large and medium company, I also then thought I quite fancy having a crack at a bit of a startup, which is where D2L came in, and they fit the mold in terms of being very focused on education, which is very much D2L's bread and butter, as I'm sure we'll talk about. But also when I joined D2L to take over leading the EMEA business, we were only 6 or 7 people in the region. So it was very much startup mode, which was a real challenge and a really interesting and rewarding journey for me. Here I am. I lead a little business of 50 plus people, well over 100 customers, and we're really, just getting started. And we're making a real and tangible impact on student outcomes and skills development across the globe, which can only help drive our economies forward. And I suppose having a 2-year-old now, it's I'm even more invested in making sure that she gets the best out of her education.
And as you said, that path did lead you to D2L, which also created the smart learning platform called Brightspace, which many people listening will be aware of. But can you set the scene and tell the listeners a little bit more about D2L and the kind of customers that you're serving right now?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. In very simple terms, D2L are an LMS vendor, so a learning management system vendor, although we like to refer to our platform as a learning innovation platform. And we work across 3 sectors. So we work in K-12, in higher education, and in the corporate learning space as well. And we service all of those 3 sectors through the same platform, through our Brightspace learning innovation platform. K-12, I think, is fairly nascent in the EMEA region, which I run, but we have a strong K-12 presence in North America today, and we're hoping to replicate that over here. Is a Canadian company. We're based in a little place called Kitchener, which is a bit of a tech hub, Kitchener-Waterloo, about an hour and a half outside of Toronto. The company was founded in 1999 by a guy called John Baker, and we're still founder-led to this day. One of the things that I really love about D2L and that makes us a little different to the competitors out there is that we see ourselves as very much a teaching and learning company first, and the technology comes second. So we build the technology to support the trends that we're seeing in teaching and learning out there. The company, for those eagle-eyed amongst your viewers, you'll have noticed that the company IPO'd in November. Again, that's definitely a seminal moment in the story of D2L. We're all really proud of how we built the business to this point. And one of the things that we're most proud of, I think, is that despite IPOing, our founder, John, has retained overall control in the company and has over 90% of the voting shares today. We're still able to remain laser focused on our mission, and the IPO is more of a fundraiser to accelerate that mission. So we work with over 1,500 customers globally, from some of the largest, most prestigious and innovative higher education institutes across North America and international, and also some of the largest corporate organizations in the world as well, to help them drive skills within their work. That's where D2L is. As I said, we're very much on a mission to transform the way the world learns and to make sure that we leave no learner behind as we do that.
Wow, what an incredible journey you guys have been on there. And of course, here in the UK, the Department of Education has prioritised improving the sector's digital infrastructure and connectivity. And it's also placed innovation, technology and data front and centre, backed up with, I think, something like a 1.8 million in financial support. But can you expand on this? And also the need to reassess all current staff training initiatives, particularly in the use of digital technologies in order to facilitate this? Because for a long time, I think, in the education sector, there were people worried that technology would take over the human role of the teacher, but it's not at all. It's a tool for them, isn't it, to enhance the learning? Absolutely.
Well, that's certainly the way that we'd like it to be seen. I'll start by saying that I don't profess to be an expert on government policy. And as I said, our K-12 journey over in EMEA is fairly nascent right now. But we see the policies and the strategies that the government have released. We see the increase in funding, a lot of which is to try and help our learners cap post-pandemic. So there's good noises coming out of the government. What I would say is, from our perspective as a technology partner or vendor in the space, good noises, but to this point, not enough action, I think. And you'll have read, as everybody else will, of that funding is never enough. That the funding that, it sounds like a lot of money, but actually there are plenty of people out there. When you divide it by the number of students and the number of institutions, it's actually not a huge amount of money. So what I would like to see is governments doing more to actually centralize the use of technology. And we can look abroad for inspiration here to other countries within the Europe, Middle East and Africa region, where governments actually go out and procure best of breed platforms for their school systems to make sure that every learner has equality of the tools that they're using and equity in education. And certainly I haven't read all 135 pages of the survey on EdTech, which was released I think it was in May this year. But from what I have read from that, as a vendor, we knew most of that already. Obviously, the survey was designed to help schools embed EdTech to drive cost savings and efficiencies and better outcomes and resilience. And for vendors like ourselves, it was there to help us better understand the technology landscape in the school sector and to really drive us to adapt and develop our tools better. But we've already understood just how poorly schools were prepared for the pandemic. We knew that technology should have been playing a bigger part in driving equity and personalization in education and ultimately better outcomes. And the sector, as I said, is still massively underfunded and not, from my perspective, not given enough direction. But the second part of your question, you're absolutely right. When we talk about technology and innovation and bringing about digital transformation, we have to discuss the importance of digital literacy plans and training for the people that are actually going to use the software and drive that transformation. And leaders within institutions have a responsibility to review digital literacy programs for staff. And I think we've seen good progress during the pandemic, certainly within the more forward-thinking institutions who've embraced digital transformation. It's been a huge task and still is a huge task to train and support the numbers of staff that we have in use of these digital tools. And there's so many new technologies have been thrust upon us in the last 18 months, and there are still many more to come to solve the problems or improve issues that have been identified since we've started using them as well. The shift to online was on a whole a success, but I think there's recognition around the education sector right now that there are still holes, and there's recognition that we need to fill these holes to take it to the next level. It's been wholesale change and adoption, and more critically, transformation takes time and repetitious practice and a whole lot of will as well. But I've seen so much progress and so many projects that universities, in which is the main space that we operate in, should be hugely proud of. And we just hope that this agility and the quick thinking and the building of staff literacy and continued professional development programs remains, because it will need to if we're going to truly embrace digital transformation.
And one of the things that put you guys on my radar was when D2L, I think that you recently consulted 500 higher education professionals across the UK, all around their motivations behind their digital transformation strategies as well. And most importantly, for a lot of people listening, the struggles that they've been through and overcome over the last 18 months. So can you tell me a little bit more about that report?
Yeah, absolutely. It was actually 5,000 people globally. So the survey was actually an international undertaking. So international is everything outside of North America. So we serve people within the higher education space, and across a mix of job roles as well. So we were talking to leaders, we were talking to academics across Latin America, Asia, Australia, New Zealand, and my region, the EMEA region. And it was really interesting to see the differences in responses across the regions, but also the synergies between regions as well. And I think overall, there's no doubt there's been a recognition that digital transformation is necessary and a positive thing. I think there was I'm trying to remember one of the stats from the report. I think it was 80% plus of respondents in the UK felt that online technology enhances the quality of higher education. I think if we'd have done that survey 2 years ago, that number might have been a lot lower. Opinions on technology have improved overall, and I think folks are seeing the benefits more than they did pre-pandemic, and the use of digital tools is certainly only going to increase. In the UK and Benelux regions, which are our main focus in Europe, so the Netherlands being our sort of main European region, the focus is moving forward as well, fairly similarly. So what are they going to focus on coming out of the pandemic? And across both those regions, enhancing online provision was number one, which makes a lot of sense, because when I think about the way that universities reacted to the pandemic in the first instance, it was all about how quickly can we get things online, and everybody moved to a fully synchronous experience where lectures were happening on Teams or Zoom, and there wasn't much more than that happening. And in the background, the ed tech experts, the learning technologists were trying to improve the structure of their online offering. Modernization of digital infrastructure is another key focus moving forward to better support that online provision. And the third one that was unanimous across all regions, including thinking about South Africa here as another region that we surveyed, investing in staff digital skills was just so high up on the agenda, particularly though what I would say is there's we noticed a difference between the Benelux region and the UK, and we expected this because obviously we work heavily in both spaces, but the Benelux region are a bit ahead in terms of staff digital skills. I think staff feel more comfortable with digital. They're kind of trailblazers a lot of the time, particularly in the Netherlands. But yeah, in both regions, a big focus. And I think the survey also highlighted why people thought that digital transformation was necessary. So what were the sort of drivers for it? And those turned out to be improving course quality, moving forward again, enhancing the student experience. And I think we'll come on to maybe touch on why it's important to look at the student experience when we think about moving to online, because it's a very different pedagogy to the sort of traditional campus education. And the final thing was to remain competitive. The world definitely is moving towards more online, more blended, more hybrid learning. Institutions really need to look at their online provision, their digital experience, to remain competitive in the market that they sit in. I think final thing maybe I'll mention is in the UK, we did learn that I think it was about 50% of respondents said that they had a staff digital skills initiative in place, which is really encouraging. And I think it was about 48 or 49%, something like that, of respondents said that new technology was introduced in the pandemic. I would have expected that number to be higher, to be honest with you, Neil. But again, it shows that we are looking at technology and trying to find ways that technology can positively influence the experience for our students.
So if we take one of those regions and explore the current state of the UK digital learning programs, how are institutions now approaching DX, especially based on the findings that you uncovered at D2L there? Is there anything that you can share around that?
Yeah, certainly. I think it's fair to say that the state of learning programs, digital learning programs in the UK varies. There are some shining examples, and in our humble opinion, of what good online or digital learning programs or blended learning looks like. The University of Suffolk springs to mind. When I think about this, they moved to a block and blend model and put sort of Brightspace, which is our learning innovation platform, at the centre of that experience. And there are some not examples, but I think it's fair to say that even those who aren't leading the way have improved as a result of the pandemic. Lots of lessons have been learned about what good looks like and where improvements now need to be made. Everyone shifted quickly to online, as I said, during the pandemic, to synchronous to start with, and then came the realization that asynchronous has to play a big part in online learning, and then came the realization that design, intentional design, plays a huge part in online learning. Building in knowledge checks and activities in the right place. The flow of a course needs serious thought and design in an online setting, rather than the way that the learning innovation or LMS platforms have been used historically to just upload lecture notes or scheduling a Teams meeting, etc., etc. So it's been a steep learning curve, but a really positive one in general. And I expect that the general state of digital learning programs is now infinitely more sophisticated than it was 18 months ago. And I only expect that to improve. In terms of an approach to digital transformation in the UK, I think we found the biggest obstacles from the survey that we did were cost, lack of resources, and the obvious one, the academic digital skills gap, which is all perhaps to be expected. But on a positive note, we learned that it was leadership within universities that were the ones pushing the digital transformation agenda, which is fantastic, and that's the way it needs to be. Then staff, closely followed by staff, and then students. So we saw great support for digital transformation and acknowledgement that it's necessary to drive better student engagement and quality of education and ultimately outcomes for students, and a commitment to enhance their online provision, staff skills, and implement new technology. Whilst, as I said, it's potentially not quite as far ahead in their digital journey than institutions in the Netherlands, for example, the pandemic has definitely accelerated digital transformation in the UK. And as a tech vendor, we're having more and more positive conversations with universities wanting to innovate and wanting to build in resilience to future shocks.
And I'm curious, I appreciate this is a pretty big question, but in your opinion, what do you think institutions should be prioritising now, especially as part of their recovery plans, and how learning must be more data-driven?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's already been said. The focus, as I said, shifted immediately to how do we make sure our staff are capable of delivering a digital experience, an online or a blended experience. So that has to be number one for me, the staff digital literacy piece. And again, I talked about Suffolk, but there's umpteen examples of universities that have put in place fantastic upskilling programs for their staff, and long may that continue. I think one thing I will emphasize is digital by design, as I would refer to it. So it has to be intentional. And I think prior to the pandemic, the integration of technology into learning was a little bit more of an afterthought. And in order to really take us to the next level and drive improvement in that experience and therefore better outcomes, it has to be intentional. But also to continue to develop those staff digital skills, it has to be intentional, because they have to be, and almost has to be mandated that good online looks like this, and you have to use these tools and upskill on these tools. And this includes redesign of courses and programs to include more blended approaches, use of asynchronous tools, peer-to-peer tools to encourage ownership from a student perspective, and also personalization. And I guess I would say the final thing is contingency for if this were to happen again in some capacity. Do they have a robust, fully online setup for courses? And I look to North America when I think about this, because or Canada, which is where D2L is from. The institutions over there were so well set up for something like this because of contingency plans in place for snow and things like that, where kids can't get to school. Yeah. And a lot of the universities over there offer all their courses both on campus and online. So they're prepared for that shift, which is a really smart thing. And so I think thinking about contingency plans is an absolute must. And then you mentioned data-driven and how learning must be data-driven. And I think the way I'd answer that is by saying learning's no different to anything else that we try to consistently improve. If you want to improve, you need to measure it. I think that was one of the things I learned from a mini MBA I did back in the day. If you can't measure it, you can't improve it. And if you want to see patterns, you need to look at the data. And I don't think that we do enough today to measure the impact our teaching and course design has on student outcomes. I was watching an interview actually a couple of weeks ago with a guy called John Hattie, I'm sure many of your listeners will know John. And when he was asked what the single biggest thing educators could do to improve student outcomes, he said, shut up and listen. It's the only way to hear our impact, yet we spend so much time talking as educators. And data is a way of listening. Are we tracking our student engagement? Are we intervening at the right points? Are we surveying our students for their preferences and adapting the experience based on their answers? Just like any other industry and profession, if we don't listen, reflect, look at the data, we can't make improvements, we can't stay competitive, and ultimately we can't drive better outcomes for our learners. What I would say is we've seen a real positive shift here recently in higher education. D2L as a business, we focus heavily, always have, on learning analytics and providing actionable insight from data, and not just the data, but actually helping institutions use that data. And for many years prior to the pandemic, learning analytics and data strategy, they're all buzz phrases and a bit of demo candy and things like that. We're now having really serious conversations about how universities want to take advantage of the rich data and analytics tools that we provide within our platform. And they're thinking about the questions that they need answering and who needs that information and when they need that information to make the appropriate improvement. So I think we're heading in the right direction from a data perspective, but it is very important.
And I love that quote you used ago. It reminded me of an old Larry King quote, who, of course, interviewed just about everybody on the planet that you may have heard of. And he said something along the lines of, I remind myself every morning, nothing I say this day is going to teach me anything. If I'm going to learn, I must do it by listening. And it's so true, isn't it?
Absolutely it is. Yeah, absolutely. But it is funny because we do so much talking.
And you mentioned tools a few moments ago. What are the types of tools at universities' disposal right now as they look to cover the gaps in students' learning and improve the overall experience?
Yeah, the list is long and a whole host of different sort of areas. We're seeing a big shift of universities to look at collaboration tools. And obviously some of that started with the shift to synchronous when we moved online, so Zoom and Teams and things like that. But now they're looking at collaboration tools to try and recreate as much of that on-campus experience online as we possibly can. So things like, using Teams to its full extent, Microsoft Teams, feedback fruits, integration of social media. Because during the pandemic, a lot of learners actually took to social media to reflect and to discuss with peers and things like that. So it was actually a really positive, I thought, during the pandemic. And I talked about personalization of learning earlier on, but personalization of learning has to come not just from the tools, but actually from the students themselves, and self-reflection and peer-to-peer work and things like that. And those sorts of tools all enable that type of pedagogy. We're seeing online examination platforms and proctoring come to the fore because more and more of that is being done online. E-portfolio solutions for reflection and peer learning and demonstrating mastery of skills as we see a bit more of a shift towards away from summative to formative and mastery and evidence-based learning modalities. Analytics and BI tools, as we've just discussed, institutions are looking deeper into this and building data strategies, lists of questions, etc., that they want answered. And I think obviously there'd be something amiss if I didn't mention the learning management system or learning innovation platform. In our case, we like to think of our platform as the center of an ecosystem. And if you have the right one, you should have the ability to seamlessly integrate with all those other tools that I just mentioned and provide a really seamless experience to your users. And modern learning platforms should provide a whole host of tools, suite of tools to personalize the experience for learners, to facilitate early and proactive intervention when learners are falling behind, to drive collaboration and support modern pedagogies like active learning, problem-based learning, mastery-based learning, all these different pedagogies coming in now. And all of this without overburdening the academic or the support staff. So technology has a huge part to play in making sure that we don't overburden those people, that we can automate a lot of this stuff and deliver these experiences on any device, anytime, anywhere.
And as the speed of technological change continues to move at breakneck speed, many are finding it difficult to keep up and it can feel incredibly daunting. But of course, the reality is it's never going to move this slow again. So looking to the future, do you see that need for flexible online learning environments and contingency plans to guarantee continuity for students? Do you see that just only increasing and the speed increasing too?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We've long spoken about, even way before the pandemic, as a company, we've been trying to promote this sort of shift away from one size fits all to a kind of more one-size-fits-me type model, because every learner is different. They come from different backgrounds, different financial situations, different life situations. And throw in the pandemic there, all those things require flexibility. Students are no longer just 18-year-olds coming out of college. And we need to be able to support all learners. And that requires a huge amount of flexibility. Learners learn in different ways. Many learners get left behind because they're the sort of person that doesn't want to put their hand up in class, for example. Digital gives them a way to go over things at their own pace as many times as they want, ask a question privately if they like. So a lot of learners will have benefited from that flexibility that came from the pandemic and the shift to online. The key thing, in my opinion, is student choice. Giving students the ability to learn how they want to learn. Some will choose to be on campus, others want the ability to go at their own pace online, others want a mix, some are visual learners, some aren't. Technology has the ability to support all of that if implemented properly. And we touched on continuity plans for shocks like the one we've just experienced. And as I said, I think we've learned a lot. We've done a great job in general, and we've come out with loads of lessons on how to improve, ensure no one gets left behind next time. Redesign of course structure, content design, delivery mechanisms, and technology is all key. But I think it's all about, to go back to a previous point, intentional design for continuity. And it'll be interesting to see whether the lessons that we've learned from the pandemic are truly carried forward, or whether we'll slip back into our old ways and institutions will start to rely again on reputation rather than innovation.
I've loved chatting with you today, and we began our podcast talking about your origin story, but now we've come full circle. I'm going to ask you if there was a song, piece of music, movie or book that has inspired you or helped in your career. Can you leave us with something and maybe a story behind it and leave our listeners on an inspirational note?
Oh, I can try. I can't think of a particular film or song. There are probably many, but if I was to give your listeners maybe a recommendation of a book, I would say there's a book called Legacy, which is sort of legacy, 15 lessons in leadership. And it's actually all about what the All Blacks rugby team can teach us about the business of life. It's written by a guy called James Kerr. And it was one of the first leadership books that I read. And much of it has become a kind of code by which I lead in my profession now. It's fairly straightforward stuff, but I think it keeps you on the right path as a leader. And maybe I'll just give you a couple of very simple examples from that book. One of the lessons is called Sweep the Sheds. And the All Blacks, despite being probably the greatest rugby team on planet Earth and true professionals at the elite end of the sport, they don't have people to clean their changing rooms at the end of the day after a match. They take it in turns for them to sweep the sheds, as they say. And it reminds you to stay humble. And when you get into positions of leadership, no job is too much of a chore for you, and you need to roll up your sleeves and get involved with some of the jobs that you might not want to do. One of the other ones, I can't tell you what the actual word they use in the book is, but I'll call it no idiots, which is just all about maintaining the right culture in an organization and making sure that you could have the best salesperson in the world working for you, but if they're poisonous to the culture that you're trying to create and poisonous to the rest of the team or to your customers, then you got to let them go, because there's no room for idiots, shall we say. So that would be my recommendation, I think.
Awesome. Absolutely love that. And for anyone listening wanting to find out more information about D2L, contact your team about anything we've discussed today. What's the best starting point?
I think go straight to our website, so www.d2l.com. For those in the UK or Europe, you'll be then diverted to our EU website, and there's a contact us page there. There's an opportunity to download a free trial of the platform as well if you just want to have a little play around. But obviously, we'd prefer to have a chat first and foremost to understand the challenges that you're facing and potentially how we can help you overcome them.
Well, so many big takeaways from our conversation there, from the tools at universities' disposal as they look to cover those gaps in student learning and improve the experience, and also the need for flexible online learning environments and contingency plans, etc. So many great points, but all washed out with your great origin story, and also leaving us with a cracker of a book too. So thanks for sharing that with us today.
No, thank you very much for having me, Neil. Pleasure to talk to you.
So a big thank you to Stuart for talking about the tools at universities' disposal as they look to cover the gaps in students' learning and begin to improve the overall experience. Not to mention the need for a flexible online learning environment and contingency plans to guarantee the continuity needed for students. more important than anything, is making those learning products that are going to transform our world, and doing that by simply making technology more human. And remember, send any questions my way. And if you do leave a review for the podcast, I'm on a big review charge at the moment. Send me a screenshot of the review. Tell me your real name and I will read it out on the podcast too. And you can do all that by emailing me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. Connect with me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram at Neil C. Hughes. And my website is techblogwriter.co.uk. So they've got many ways you can get hold of me. Keep those messages coming in, and I'll return again tomorrow. Hopefully you'll join me. So a big thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.